Hi, I'm Christy Hightower, site moderator on Planet INFOWARS, here to let you know how patriots like you are talking this week. Have you ever thought about the greatest risk to civilization, biologically referencing? Well, user Rosso has, and in his article, The Greatest Biological Threats to Civilization, he references something like 20 different known biological threats: anthrax, cholera, Ebola, different things like that. He gives you fatality rates, symptoms, how it would affect you, and these are just the ones that we know about, much less ones that might already be developing against us. Then there's an article by In Like Flint, The Universe, Ancient Astronauts in Atlantis. He starts by telling you a story from his childhood, how his fascination with aliens from above coming down and giving us technology from ancient civilizations ago, and how the in the know now are holding this information, withholding it from us. So that being said, it leads me into our last article, Food Stamps, President Obama Wants You on Food Stamps. This is actually a great article for many reasons. Melissa Melton is actually one of the reporters from the reporter contest. And this article was featured on the INFOWARS homepage, and it's still a featured article. She talks about how skyrocketing food stamp usage during Obama's presidency, something like 100%. She gives great references. She is well-spoken and had a great response to her article. So that being said, we are looking out for great articles, well-written, well-referenced. So keep up the good work, you patriots out there. And that being said, also, some other things on Planet INFOWARS, you can find the deal of the day, like In the Fed t-shirt. We had that on sale for $12.95 in the sidebar, and that's only on Planet INFOWARS. Other things like groups that you can join, get active, create missions, meet people in your local area. So keep up the good work. We are paying attention, and thank you so much, patriots. Till next week.
And we are back from break on the INFOWARS Nightly News. Thanks to Darren McBreen for covering the news portion. Tonight we're joined by a special guest. He's the author of America's Nazi Secret. Is John Loftus, probably the foremost expert into all the financier connections on the American and British sides with the funding of the Nazis in World War II and everything that happened afterwards. He will help set the record straight and we'll get deep into history. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Loftus.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Could you first tell us about your background, everything you did as an attorney, as an intelligence officer, and what kind of things you're working on now?
Sure, I was an Army officer. Then I went to law school and was hired by the Attorney General of the United States. And I worked at the headquarters of the Justice Department. And because of my intelligence background, I had very high security clearances, many levels above top secret. I worked on the CIA cases and the Nazi war crimes cases. Until one day, somebody got the bright idea of assigning me to see if there are any Nazis hiding in America, and I found out there were. They were on the CIA payroll. But the CIA didn't know they were Nazis. Our State Department and the British Secret Service had dumped Nazis here, and when it turned out that it was a bit of a Cold War blunder, the British intelligence agent that was sending us Nazis to spy on Russia was himself a communist agent. So instead of getting anti-communist freedom fighters, the dregs of the Nazi war criminals were being sent to America. And we had two CIAs, one that worked for the Republicans, hidden inside the State Department, and one that worked for the Democrats. You see, no one ever thought that Truman would beat Dewey, and they had already hired the Nazis when Truman was reelected. So at this critical point in Cold War history, we actually had two intelligence services, two CIAs, one that hunted Nazis, the CIA, and one that recruited them, the OPC, the State Department. And that division has continued in American foreign policy as well as intelligence policy over the last half century. So I'm sort of a specialist in the Mission Impossible crowd, the ones where the secretary will disavow any knowledge of their actions. And basically, these guys were bankers. They were in it for the money.
Right. So when we get into the whole history of the CIA, that goes back to a lot of the Wall Street bankers. Many of them were skull and bones who helped set up the National Security Act. People like Harriman, the Wiseman, working with people like Dulles. Where do you see all this converging around World War II?
Well, it's funny. People don't realize that some of America's finest families funded Hitler. There's going to be a documentary coming out called American Secrets sometime this year or next. And it focuses on those families like the Harrimans and the Walkers and the Bushes. That, people only know that President Kennedy's dad bought some Nazi stocks, and people don't know that he bought them from Prescott Bush. They both went to Germany on the same ship before the war. So there were Americans who poured a lot of money. In fact, one of the causes of the Great Depression might have been the relocation of American investment capital from companies like Brown Brothers Harriman, where the Rockefellers had their money parked. And they moved that money to buy stock in German companies. And it was supposed to be a great big bargain. Germany had a high-tech monopoly in the 30s. But unfortunately, Hitler came to power, and instead of being a dog on a chain to keep the anti-communists and the labor unions at bay, Hitler seized control of the New York investors' funds. And from then on, they had a choice. They could either expose Hitler, or they could collaborate with Hitler and try and save their money. And sadly, most of these people became traitors. During World War II, some of America's finest families gave aid and comfort to the enemy. They kept financial assistance to the Third Reich going on all during World War II.
But hadn't they, even before that, set up the eugenics regime, partnership between the Anglo factions? The Rockefellers had supported the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute. All this had moved over to Germany along with the industrial machine. So the financing really met with a lot of very serious foreign policy and kind of private partnership agendas. Well,
I think what you have is, and I don't want to overstate the case, there were some wackos with a lot of money who thought that eugenics was a serious movement. And they believed in racial superiority, and that those who had money were obviously racially superior, ignoring the fact that they inherited their money from mommy and daddy, who sometimes had done very despicable things to acquire the family funds. The eugenics movement was, it's so colorful, I think, that it distracts attention, and people look for a great conspiracy. When sharks swim in parallel lines, they're not conspiring together. They just all smell blood in the water and are racing to get there first. What we had was an awful lot of very rich and very greedy Americans, Republicans and Democrats, but mostly Republicans, who thought that Hitler was the way to make a lot of money because he would allow them to have cartels, monopolies, and trusts that were forbidden under American law.
Right.
But, these guys had worked out a loophole called the Webb-Pomerine Act of 1918, where they could set up trust monopolies and cartels overseas. And some of them invested in Bolshevik Russia, and some invested in the nascent Nazi Party of Germany. Well, the Russian investment didn't go so well, but the German investment looked like it was going to pay off in spades. Nobody thought America would ever go to war against Hitler. In fact, it was Hitler who declared war on us, not the other way around.
Sure. So going to the post-war period, leading up to the Nuremberg trials, you say they were fixed. Can you lead us up to, what all was going on with that, the role of the Justice Department here in the United States in covering up all the Nazis who'd been shipped in, and talk about Operation Paperclip?
Sure. After Dewey surprisingly lost to Truman, the spy service inside the State Department was in a rough place, and they worked with the Justice Department on a cover-up. The Justice Department was in this up to their eyeballs. They knew that Nazi intelligence agents were being brought into America illegally. And, you know, a lot of attention has been paid to the Nazi scientists. And it's colorful, but you missed the big picture. What you don't realize was that the British intelligence officer helping us recruit these Nazi scientists was a guy named McLean. Donald McLean was Kim Philby's best buddy. He was also a communist agent. So instead of getting the Nazi scientists who could actually build rockets, we got the Nazi bureaucrats. We got the guys who were war criminals, guys like Arthur Rudolph, who used human beings as if they were disposable chemicals. He had these underground caves where they assembled the V-2 rockets. Werner von Braun, you know, very patronizing bureaucrat. But what happened is the British made sure that the best of the Nazi scientists went to Moscow. That's why Sputnik came out first. And all we got were the scientists that kept exploding rockets on the pad. The sad thing is, President Harry Truman had explicitly forbidden this. He had ordered that the military could never recruit any German who was a voluntary member of the SS, who was wanted for war crimes, or had a low Nazi party number. And the army said, oh, yes, Mr. President. And they lied to their teeth. This army and the State Department fixed the records so that these German scientists could come to America. And it was a hilarious farce. You know, when Kim Philby finally defected to Moscow, all the State Department could do was bury the files. Until 50 years afterwards, I stumbled across them. I was the first American to go into these underground vaults and look at the records of what really happened at the beginning of the Cold War, back when America had two spy agencies. And what the State Department and guys like Allen Dulles and his brother John Foster Dulles had done was beyond despicable. The Dulles brothers wanted to cover up for the American clients who had invested in Nazi Germany. Mm-hmm. And they did that by saying that, well, we used Nazi intelligence officers to spy on Russia, and it's all hush-hush. And that's how they shut down all the money laundering investigations. And it turns out that the money was being moved, and this embarrasses me as a Roman Catholic to say, the money was being moved to the Vatican. It was the one bank in the world that had diplomatic immunity. And the Vatican Bank would move the money out of Europe to Latin America and then back to West Germany for the great economic revival of West Germany.
Sure.
And all it was that, you know, like Chase Manhattan Bank, the Rockefellers, they were just getting their money back if they had invested.
And respectively, the Vatican had also been part of the rat lines and shipping Nazis to foreign countries as well.
Yeah, I mean, you couldn't just ship the money out, you know, because the Nazis who were left behind would complain about it. So they had to devise a way of doing that as well. So here's the tragedy. I have friends who are, you know, very old men now who were Nazi hunters inside the U.S.